This is the template I'm going to use to be able to review what we covered in class in terms of the various line techniques. This one already conveys two. It's a quick sketch, so you can see the construction lines, a line done over and over and over again until the right one was achieved. And you can see also cross corners. Everywhere I went, I didn't confine myself to a certain length because I didn't know what it was yet. I had to discover it through continuously constructing it with line, here and here and here, without vanishing points to follow. I was just using my knowledge that this part of the chair that's closest to me should appear larger, even though it isn't, than the more distant aspect of it a little bit further away, and not that far at all. Now, one of the other techniques that we looked at was fuzzy line, and I'm going to use my pencil crayon to achieve that. So I'm just going to go in. Now this is an inside line, so I don't want to make it too thick. I want to be thicker and more firm on the outside. Now you rarely ever use one line technique all by itself. Quite often you're using several, and in this case I'm using thick to thin line, I'm using such a varied line, I'm using sorry, I'm concentrating now. So you see there's some flexibility with the pencil crayon. Please don't use charcoal, don't use anything that's will blur or smudge and dirty up someone else's drawing. Otherwise I won't be able to accept it. Just use your pencil crayon and see what you can achieve with that. But I'm getting a lot of, see, I'm almost using punch line now because I'm putting in a little bit cross corner. So you rarely ever use them separately and alone. You're always combining techniques, and just to suit your purpose. This is soft furnishing, so that suits the soft line. Your box will end up looking soft when you use a soft line. The next example is hit, go, hit, an unusual name for an unusual looking technique. You start by going back and forth and go, back and forth and go. So you're getting that little knot, and then you go, and then you can start somewhere else. It's okay, it doesn't matter, but you're looking for that little knot. It's almost like join the dots. But the same things apply. You want to be heavier outside the form and thinner inside the form. And a little knot, hit, a little hit and go. So every time you change direction, you go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth, back and forth. And you begin to see these dots or knots forming. I'm just trying to be lighter inside the form. So every time you change direction, and you can put a little bit of punch underneath too to ground it. So, the next technique is professional gap, and what this is meant to do is place little gaps in between your lines that allow you to feel as though light is hitting the form and breaking up those lines. So a good place to start might be, I'm going to start at the back this time. I'm going to start here and go there and there, and you see there's a gap so light can come in. And I'll start here and go here, and I don't always get a gap, but that's okay. You can leave some a little more solid or just unfinished. And I'm using this almost dry brush, so so I'm getting a fuzzy line too. This is soft furnishing, so you choose your equipment based on what it is you want to achieve, the feeling you want to achieve. So those gaps are soft. If I were to make them straight rather than curved and a little organic, this would have a very hard feel. I would save that for a wooden chair. This is soft furnishing, so I'm working this way. So wherever I can, I leave a little gap. So sometimes a good idea is to come from one direction and leave the gap in the center. There's my gap, and I'll leave a little gap there and a little gap there. Now, it does seem as if I'm just jabbing at it. I'm not jabbing at it. I'm making a solid line, but yeah, you don't want to feel like you're jabbing. It's not about that. So I can even, when I'm doing this, I can leave a little gap as well. I don't have to fill this all the way up the way I did in other techniques. Just feels like it needs something there. Okay, maybe a little something there to give it some oomph. Now, professional dot is very similar to professional gap. You're leaving gaps, but every time you do a gap, you put a dot. So I can maybe start here, and it happens quite naturally, and it gives it a little more looser feeling as well. So it's going to look a little contrived because we're not used to doing it, but when you are, it won't look that way. You'll do it automatically without even thinking. So you're doing the same thing though. You're trying to allow for light to penetrate the lines and show a feeling of air rather than flat form. It's supposed to be a little bit more alive than that. So again, you can overlap your corners, you can put your dots outside. I'm getting a little bit more accustomed to it now myself. After doing that last one, it's kind of a natural progression. So you see, it's almost a little cartoonish. I've exaggerated it so much, but it does, you know, you're quick sketching with the client, and this would enliven your concept having these dots. So they do have their place. Now, freehand line is exactly what it says it is. You're just simply following what you've drawn. You'll always have a template underneath, and just following it along, following the contours, going inside the form and coming back out. Following along here, maybe you've got a double line, but there's no attempt to make the line straight, and it suits this subject matter because it's soft furnishing. So, and if you have a natural shake to your hand when you're writing or drawing, then that's actually going to pay off in this technique, because if all your lines are a little jittery, then they'll all look all right. But if you try to force yourself to make them all straight, and that's not how you naturally do it, some of the shaky lines are going to creep in, and the straighter ones are going to look out of place. So remember, if it's all off, it'll look all right. But if you start adding some rulered lines in, it's going to look wrong. Now, continuous line is the one technique that baffles people the most. But all it is really is just you following the form and never taking your pen off the paper. So if I start here, for example, and follow this down, I'll go up to show some of the little folds in the fabric, and then I'll go around, and then I can come inside, but I've got to double back. Every time I do something, I have to connect it to the next nearest thing. Otherwise, I'm not completing a continuous line. So you kind of backtrack on yourself and come forward, and there's a feeling of, oh, I just want to get this over with, but don't rush it. You know, it actually looks quite nice when you take your time and just kind of roam over the forms and feel them out. Get a feel for it. Oops, I picked up my pen. You try not to, and you just keep, and of course we're doing not just one technique here. We've got a bunch of them. We've got the freehand line, we've got thicker outer line, thinner inside line, so we can start to thicken up our line by retracing our steps and going back and figuring out what this would really kind of look like. And now I'm going to go back up here, I'm going to go there. But the whole idea behind never picking up your pen is that you're feeling out the form, trying to get a convincing representation of what's going on here. This is going up, and this is going across, and oops, I picked up my line, so I have to stop now. Variable line has to be one of my favorites. The choice that I'm going to make here is for my line to vary between thickness and thinness. So I start off with a thick line, and you can do more than just one go. I might even put a dot. And then opposing it, I'll have a thick to thin line. So you go all the way around your form. So thin, thick to thin, thick to thin. And I can put a dot. And there's another thin line out there. And I'm going to go, since I'll go thick to thin that way, that makes sense. So I can go a little bit thicker here. And here I'll go, this is thick, so I'll go from thick here to thin, and thick to thin here. Now notice that I'm leaving gaps and dots, and that's okay, because this is what happens. Your techniques overlap. So I'm going to go thick to thin down this way. I'm overlapping, that's okay. And thick to thin this way. So it's opposite. And this will go thick to thin this way. And with your Sharpie, you're getting some nice thick lines, but it doesn't feel as though I'm in control of it. And that's okay, because I'll get some surprises, and you always want to have surprises if you can manage it. And you just don't judge them right away. You just live with them a bit and see if they're that as bad as you think. And then usually they're not. So thick to thin, and I'm going to go thick to thin, leave a gap, a little gap, and thick to thin this way, and thick to thin this way, and thick to thin, and thick to thin, and thick to thin. And over here I want to go thick to thin, and thick to thin. And you see, you get a feeling of the light. Again, that light influencing our lines. So anytime you're showing the influence of light, then you're showing form. You're showing depth and weight and solidity. with punch line, you're showing 3 different weights of line. One extremely heavy one, for the outline, one a little bit thinner for the other side, and we did a little bit of this in class today when we drew our figure. And on the inside you use a thinner line, and I'm using my Sharpie again, but I'm going to use it in a much thinner way. I can use double lines. That might add a little bit of variety as well. But as long as I keep them thin, I'm all right. Remember when we were drawing our figure, when we came inside, we drew very lightly. So thicker outside lines and thinner inside lines. Oops, I think I said that opposite. It's thicker outside lines, thinner inside lines.